Several years ago, I was in the midst of an awful divorce with my then husband, full of crazy allegations and typical angry filings centered around custody of our child. As with many divorces, friends and professional colleagues seem to pick one side or the other. In my case, there was one sort of professional contact who reached out to me after hearing about the divorce, who offered to be a witness for my case because of some experiences he related that I had been previously unaware of, regarding my ex's behavior out at networking events. So after this initial call, he started calling me on a semi-regular basis to make sure I was okay. This wasn't really someone I knew prior to the separation, and he was much older than I was, but claimed to have experience with divorce and custody, so I figured it was a good idea to be polite and not alienate him. My lawyer also told me that his testimony was important, so I kept things friendly, but I always had a weird feeling about him. A few months later, he called one day, and my son was very sick, and I told him I couldn't talk and explained why. He then offered to run to the store for me, which I honestly appreciated. But after that event, he kept dropping by uninvited, or he would stop by with cookies for my son. Again, I kept telling myself to keep things polite. The divorce is coming soon. Don't make this guy mad. During this time, he had also helped me set up a security cam system that my dad had mailed me. At one point, I needed someone to walk my dog, and he offered to do it. He used and returned a spare key the same day. One evening, he showed up while I was painting and insisted on sticking around to help, even though I was having my starting over catharsis and just wanted to do it alone. Not long after the painting day incident, he showed up unannounced and uninvited once again, having magazines with random decor saying, "We could finish decorating the house." And I was so weirded out that I made an excuse to leave. I then began ignoring his calls and took my son and dog to stay with my parents for several weeks to avoid these frequent drop-ins. I came home a few weeks later thinking he would have finally gotten the hint, and it was a nice and quiet day. The following morning I took my son on an outing, and we both came back hot and tired. I put him down for a nap in my bed and decided I would close my eyes with him. I woke up maybe an hour or so later, and it took me a moment to realize that something was way off. As I'm blinking off the sleep, I realized there was a rose bush sitting on my bedside table that I definitely had not put there. There was a post-it note on it, something about planting it in the yard. I started shaking immediately. I recognized the handwriting and stood up to go splash some water in my face and decide whether or not to call my parents or the police. As I stepped into my bathroom, I realized that the mirror was covered in post-it notes, all with super creepy messages that were intended to be like love notes or with affection. But ultimately, all they did was scare me. I was still waking up trying to figure out how these notes could have gotten here. My front door was definitely locked, but as I went from room to room, there were notes everywhere. I mean hundreds of post-it notes covering the walls, in my cabinets. There was even one inside my coffee maker. I started grabbing them and putting them all into a pile when I got to the one in the kitchen that made my blood run cold. It said, "You're cute when you think no one is watching you." I then realized that there was a security camera pointed right at where that note was left. The one I had set up months earlier when I didn't think he was a psychopath. Called my parents in hysterics, sent them a bunch of photos, and my dad insisted I should not call the police. But he would drive over and change the locks and put a chain on the door. So we immediately changed the password on all the security cameras, which I had installed to document if my ex tried to break into the house. There were 4 in total, 1 on the front porch and 3 inside the house, including 1 inside my bedroom. This man could apparently see and hear everything going on inside my house for months. I realized he had just paid attention to my passwords when I was setting up the system. But the only way I can figure out that he got into my house is that he must have made a copy of my house key the day he had walked my dog. And because my dog had now gotten to know him, he wouldn't have barked to warn me, which also scared me. I was absolutely horrified. This man had been in my house for a very long time now. There's no way he could have put that many notes up quickly. And he was right next to my face and feet from my son while we were sleeping. And somehow, he thought that was okay. I left and stayed with my parents again for a few days, afraid of what he was going to do when he realized that he was now both physically and digitally locked out of my house. When I came home that night, my son was at his dad's, and I was home alone. so I got on the phone with another friend from out of town. At about 10 p.m., he shows up at the door pounding on it, trying the lock, screaming obscenities, and demanding to be let in his house. Gone were all the niceties. This was someone completely furious and derailed. All I could do was hide in my bedroom until he left. This happened on St. Patrick's Day, so I'm sure he'd been drinking. After that, there were several other times someone would start knocking on the door in the middle of the night, always when my son wasn't home. He tried reaching out using fake social media accounts several times, always getting blocked. Years later, I discovered that he had friended my mom on Facebook, and therefore was still able to see all the photos of us that she posted or shared. There was a huge argument when I saw she had left her computer logged in. A conversation they were having about me and how he could get back into my life. I sold that house 2 years later, still finding notes even as I was packing, and I am more than relieved that he no longer knows where I live. I do not post photos of my new house online. I've changed the privacy settings on all of my social media accounts. I avoid all the places he used to go, the network events he attended. I stay under the radar as much as I possibly can. Could never bring myself to play back the security camera videos because I was traumatized enough and didn't want to see just how much danger we were really in. Hopefully he never sees this post, but you know who you are. And I hope to God our paths don't cross again.
2 years ago, I was home alone in my house, watching it as my parents were away for the weekend. We lived in a normal suburban neighborhood, right outside of a major city. Well, of course, right as my parents left for the weekend, there was a crazy thunderstorm happening. I was actually getting alerts on my phone to not go outside and to stay indoors until the storm passes. I'm someone who loves thunderstorms. I usually make pizzas and watch horror movies as they rage on, and that's exactly what I was doing. I was upstairs in my room, watching Scream 4, when I suddenly got a text message. I was expecting it to be from my boyfriend, who unfortunately was working construction out in this horrible storm. But when I looked at my phone, I realized it wasn't from my boyfriend. It was from some random unknown number. Now, I usually ignore any messages I get from people I don't know, but for some reason, I was curious about this one. So I opened it up and read it. The text simply said, "Your back door is open." As I processed what the message was saying, I started to think, who could have sent this? Was it a next-door neighbor? But if it was, how would they know it's open? It was literally storming as hard as it was back during Noah's Ark. I decided that I would go downstairs to check it out, just to make sure that it wasn't open. I entered my kitchen and looked at the back door. It was closed, and it even had the lock on it. I was kind of pissed off that I'd come all the way down here for nothing. I was about to go back upstairs when I got another text. It was from that same random unknown number. However, this time it said, "Too late, sweetie. I'm already inside your house." Now my heart was racing. I was in the kitchen and decided to grab one of the knives from the drawers. I started going around my whole house, checking the bathrooms, the basement, my parents' bedrooms, and everywhere. I searched the entire house, but I couldn't find anyone. I was starting to think this was some kind of prank when I entered my living room. I was doing a quick search when I noticed the window closest to our TV was slightly open, and underneath the windowsill were wet, muddy footprints that seemed to lead to the kitchen. I immediately ran into my bedroom with the knife and locked myself inside. I even pushed my bookcase in front of the door because I was so terrified. I called my dad, who told me to call the police right away. I did. Almost an hour later, a single cop showed up to my house in the raging storm and he also did a complete search of my house and property. He also was not able to find anybody. This relieved me slightly. However, since there was nobody in the house, the officer was not able to do much. Thankfully, he sort of took pity on me and offered to sit in an unmarked car outside my house for the rest of the night. My parents came home the next day, and the first thing my dad did was he went out to the store and installed alarms and cameras around our house. Now, if there's ever a thunderstorm and I'm home alone, I always go to a friend's house or a family member's. I'm not taking any more chances. I work as a hairstylist up in a small town in New Jersey. I work for one of the major brands, and I love everything about my job. I was at work one day when out of nowhere, this massive thunderstorm came blowing through. Like it was bad. Trees were bending, shingles on roofs were blown away. And the worst part, the power in our salon had gone out. And without any power, we couldn't take any clients until it came back on. We tried to wait out the storm to see if it would pass soon and the power would come back on, but it never did. So our manager had no choice but to send everyone home early that day. Even though I only lived 5 minutes from the house, it took me almost an hour to get home because of the storm and the traffic. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I looked up at my house. My bedroom light was turned on, and I saw my husband walking around the bedroom. My husband has an office job, but he usually works way later than I do. As I watched his silhouette walk around our bedroom, I assumed that the power went out at his job, and he also had to come home early. But the weird part was, his car wasn't in the driveway. I found this very strange, but I figured there was some sort of logical explanation. Like, maybe he didn't feel comfortable driving in these dangerous conditions, and decided to Uber home instead. I sprinted into my house, trying not to get soaked, but still did anyway. I went right up to our bedroom to talk about the crazy storm and see how my husband's day was. I got to our bedroom door and opened it up. But when I did, standing in my room was not my husband. There was some other man with a bag stuffed full of our belongings and wearing some kind of warped pig mask. I actually almost had a heart attack. I screamed my head off as I realized this was actually an intruder. The man in the pig mask pointed a gun at me and told me to shut up. He stuffed my earrings and my watch into the bag, the gun still aimed at me, and then sprinted out the bedroom door. I watched as he bolted down the stairs, through the front door, and out into the storm. I cried for like 10 minutes before I could do anything. I called my husband and the police. And it turns out, my husband was still at work, and his office still had power. I had to make a report to the police of everything that was stolen. The man got away with over $8,000 worth of stuff from us. I guess if I'm thankful for anything, it was the fact that the man did not kill me. It was just us two that night, and there was nothing stopping him from doing so. I thank God every day that I'm still here and alive on this earth. Also, the police have not caught this man, and I've read other news articles about people having home invasions in nearby counties, so he's still out there and at large. Don't be as stupid as I was, everyone, and please, stay safe. So, this story happened when I was a teenager, still living at my parents' house. We lived next door to an old man. I honestly can't remember his full name, so for this story, I'll just call him Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones wasn't married. He had no kids, no pets, and pretty much always kept to himself. He was our direct neighbor to the right side of our house. In all my years of living at my parents' house, I never had a problem or issue with him. But one night, there was this massive thunderstorm going on. One of those storms that just happens at 1 in the morning when you're already fast asleep. Well, this storm woke me up. Outside my window, it was flashing lightning, and heavy rain was smacking against my window. I remember the storm had woken me up, but I really had to go to the bathroom. And it was very late at this point. I can't remember the exact time, but definitely after midnight, because my parents were already asleep. I went to our bathroom, which was only right down the hall from my room. I did my business and was washing my hands when, for no reason in particular, I decided to look outside the window. Our bathroom window faced the backyard of Mr. Jones. I was just looking out into the night, admiring the storm that was going on, when I noticed something. I saw someone walking around in Mr. Jones' backyard, carrying what looked like this heavy black bag. I couldn't see too well because of the storm, but as I observed the man carrying the bag, I realized that it was Mr. Jones. First, this was extremely weird because it was nearly a hurricane outside. Second, Mr. Jones was about 75 at this point, so I had no idea what he was doing out this late in the middle of a storm. Since I was curious, I watched him as he moved to the direct center of his yard. He also had a shovel with him, and he started digging into the earth. This went on for some time, and I was amazed at how fast he was working in such shitty conditions. But that's when he grabbed the black bag and tossed it into the hole that he just dug. I remember this part so vividly, like a scene from a horror movie. A huge flash of lightning erupted into the sky, and at that exact moment, Mr. Jones looked up from the hole and saw me standing in the bathroom window watching him. I immediately turned off the lights and ran into my bedroom. I did not leave it for the rest of the night. The next morning, I remember going to my parents and telling them what I had saw last night. They pretty much dismissed any and all concerns that I had about what Mr. Jones could have possibly been doing that night. And get this, almost a year after that happened, Mr. Jones moved out of the house, but still owned it. He wouldn't sell it or allow anyone else to move into it. This was maybe 10 years ago, and I have no idea if Mr. Jones is even still alive or where he is. But what on earth was in that black bag that he was burying? And why the hell was he doing it in the dead of night during a massive thunderstorm? All of these questions have remained unanswered for my entire life. I live far away from my childhood house now, but I'm very curious what I would find if I went back and dug up that exact spot. I think it might be something that I'm not prepared to accept.
Our official merch store is finally here. If you want to support more of our channel, check out our merch shop. The link is in the description down below. See you on the next video.